The Maximizer is our brick wall limiter plugin here in Final Touch on our iPad, and it's one of the most important parts of the mastering chain. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use the Maximizer to maximum effect on your final master. Let's go. Hi, my name is Pete, and this is Studio Live Today, where in this series, I'm helping you learn how to master your tracks using Final Touch on the iPad so that you can release your best music. And in this video, we're tackling probably the most important part of the mastering process, which is our final limiting using the Maximizer plugin here in Final Touch. So let's jump in now and take a look. So we are here in the final and possibly most important module here in Final Touch, which is our Maximizer, our brick wall limiter. And to enable it, like the rest of our plugins, we tap and drag it down into our effects chain, or we use the power button in the top left corner to turn it off and turn it back on again. Let's get familiar now with the interface that we have here and the settings that we can control. The first of these is our input gain. So if we are clipping and if we need to lower the input gain, we can lower that down using this slider. Like most of our sliders, we have a link option at the bottom here, meaning that we can independently control the left and right. If we want to link them back again, we tap link and we double tap to get back to 0 dB. Our next slider here is our threshold, which controls at what volume our limiting actually kicks in. So the lower this is, then the lower volume the limiter will kick in, meaning you get a louder overall volume on your track. And you'll hear that and be able to see that in more detail when we jump in and play this track and we dial down our threshold. Our third slider here is our ceiling, and this one is super important because this tells the limiter what is the maximum volume that the brick wall limiter will be set to. So I recommend leaving this at minus 0.3 because you give yourself a little bit of leeway. You can push it all the way up to 0 dB, but you do risk clipping if a little signal happens to slip through there. So you can adjust this to be really aggressive, or like I say, keep it conservative around minus 0.3. And our fourth slider here is our release rate. So this tells the limiter how long it should continue limiting after it's actually kicked in. So you can have a really fast release, meaning that as soon as the volume drops back down, it stops limiting, or you can have a very slow release, meaning that it can stay limited for up to a second after the volume has actually dropped down. So play with that and adjust that. It will depend on your type of track and the type of effect you're going for with your master. And next to our release is our attenuation meter. And this isn't a slider, it is just a display. And when we are playing back, this will show us how much limiting is being applied, so we can see exactly how much impact our limiter is having on our track. Which brings us to dithering, which probably needs its own video, if not its own series of videos. Dithering is basically a low-level noise that's added to your audio that reduces the errors when you change bit depth. Now, that means a lot, and that might sound like a mouthful. Basically, if you record at 24-bit and you're going to master a 16-bit stereo audio file for a CD, what you would do is you'd tap in 16 bits for your bit depth here, you'd choose a dithering type, and then you'd choose some noise shaping, either none or one of these three. Now, by default here in Final Touch, all of this is off, so it doesn't actually do any dithering. And if you're going from 24-bit to 24-bit, there's an argument that you don't need to. If you want to, though, if you want to experiment with this, you can throw in one of these. You can hear, when I've got it on 8-bit, you can actually hear that low-level noise. Let's just drop this back to 24-bit, and you can't actually hear anything there. So you can play around with dithering. Don't lose too much sleep over it. If your song sounds really bad and you've exported it, maybe turn on dithering and see if it sounds better. Okay, so let's now start limiting this track using the Maximizer. So I've left my release here very quick here at the moment at 1 millisecond. I'm going to hit play, and then what I'll do is I'll bring this threshold down and listen and also look at the attenuation meter over there on the right and see what it's going to do to our sound as we start driving the threshold down and apply some limiting.
Goats have it easier than me. They don't have to work, they don't have to lift a finger. Goats have it easier than me. They don't have a care, and I wanna be as free as goats. I think that
So what you've heard and what you've seen there is that as we bring the threshold down, our attenuation meter here is showing that we're starting to limit the signal. And if you watch over here on the far right, you'll see on our master output that the right-hand one, which is our output, is now hitting that 0 dB. So it's really starting to limit and get right up onto 0, which is what we're looking for here. Now, there's a word of caution here. There's two things to consider here. You do want to try and keep some of the dynamic range. So if you drop your threshold right down here, not only is it going to start distorting and sounding bad, but you're going to remove any of that range that you have. So yes, it's good to have a nice smooth sound, but you don't necessarily want it to be what we call a sausage shape, where it's just going to be all the way across in the waveform and there's going to be no peaks and troughs whatsoever. So let's just completely limit that. I'm going to turn the volume down just so that it's not going to blast you. And then let's take a listen to this if we've got some extreme limiting with the threshold here.
And I might go insane, putting up with all of the things you say and do.
So I did turn the volume down on my mixer there just so it didn't blast your ears there, but hopefully you heard and saw that that was a really bad thing to do. So if you're bringing your threshold all the way down, you're telling Final Touch that you just want everything to be limited, and that adds a whole bunch of limiting. It sounds bad and distorted, and it also, you would have seen that it's sitting up there at 0 dB, so it's not giving you any dynamic range at all. It's going to be really bad. So be really careful in how you set your threshold, because you want to try and maintain that balance between a nice, healthy, loud signal that's going to be competitive with other tracks, but also not crushing it so much that it starts distorting or that it sounds too loud and removes all of that nice dynamic range from your track. Now, like most of our plugins here, we do have a bunch of presets. So if we tap here where we can reset, we've got a bunch of different presets. So let's go with something a little bit crazy. Let's go fast and loud and see what this dials in for us. Let's hit play.
And I need to find another way to survive in this land, and I might eat a cat, and maybe then I can be at one with.
So the main change that's happened there is that our release time has been increased, which means that it takes longer for the compression to actually be released, the limiting to actually be released. So having that longer time means it sticks up there a little bit more. So if you want more dynamic range, sometimes you want to drop your release down so that you're not holding on to that limiting for quite as long. So you can see here that yes, it's a little bit of a cross between art and science. You do want to make sure it sounds good. You do want to check your meters, but ultimately you want to listen with your ears when you're using a limiter like this. But you can see that it is a very handy tool to have here in Final Touch. So before we finish up, let's recap and go through everything we've learned in this video. So our maximizer is a brick wall limiter, meaning that it will compress right up to a certain volume, which we set with our ceiling control here. We also have our input gain, which is the volume coming into our compressor, and our threshold sets when the compressor should actually kick in. We then have our release control over here, which tells the compressor or the limiter exactly how long it should hold on to that limited sound before it releases if our volume drops back down. Our attenuation meter shows us how much limiting or how much gain reduction we're actually putting in using our maximizer. And finally, dithering is a topic unto itself. Experiment with it if you want to. You can leave it off and you should still get a good sound. But again, if your sound isn't right, experiment with your dithering and see what you like. There you go, the Maximizer module here in Final Touch. Now, if you've been following the whole series, you should now have a mastered track that is ready to release. But there's one more thing you need to do, and that is to export your song. So in the next video, I'll be showing you how you can export from Final Touch so you can release your song. Check out some more videos down below, and I'll see you on the next one.